Everyone, we are going to finish vitamins today, but before, and we are going to talk basically about folate and B12, but before we do that, I just want to go back to vitamin B6 because someone drew my attention to the fact that in the previous lecture I forgot to, or I didn't provide the RDA for vitamin B6. So I just want to go back to one slide, and it's the slide that we spoke about symptoms of deficiency and toxicity of B6. And what I did here is I just added the RDA for this vitamin. So for men and women between 19 and 50 years of age, it's approximately 1.3 milligrams per day. But as we age, and especially if we get older than 51, then for men it's 1.7 milligrams per day, and for women it's about 1.5. So again, it's a slightly higher recommendation for people who are older than 51 years of age. Also for pregnant and lactating women, you have a much higher recommendation here. So it's 1.9 to 2.0 milligrams per day. So pregnant women, obviously, they have a higher requirement for obvious reasons because you have a baby that is growing and you have to provide enough vitamin B6 not only for the mother but also for the baby. And also during lactation, because production of milk is also a highly demanding process in terms of energy and metabolic transformations to produce milk that requires a higher amount of vitamin B6. So again, that's what justifies this 1.9 to 2 milligrams per day. So these numbers are important for you if you want to really understand or know about what you need related to how much you're getting from the foods that we eat. So, but I don't ask questions in the exams about numbers. In other words, it's not only for vitamin B6, but any of the vitamins that we have discussed so far. I will not ask you questions, or don't worry about memorizing these RDAs, because I will not ask questions about the simple memorization of numbers. If you ever need to know how much vitamin is what the RDA is for a particular vitamin, you just look up the numbers. Now, if I ever ask you a question involving numbers, I usually give you the number and ask you to interpret, but I don't ask questions that simply require memorization of a number. This is not it's not part of my exams, so don't worry about that. So I'm giving you all these RDAs just so you know. Again, you can compare what you need with how much you're getting if you look at what kind of foods you eat and how much obviously of these vitamins is present in each of the foods that you eat, so you can get an idea if you're whether or not you are fulfilling the requirement of each of those vitamins. But with that, I think we finish vitamin B6, and let's now move on and go straight to the last two vitamins we are going to talk, and we are going to begin with folate, as I mentioned before. So folate is right here. So how did we actually came to discover vitamin or folate and vitamin B12? It was because it originated from the search for the cure to megaloblastic anemia, which was characterized by red blood cells that are fewer than normal in number, as well as large and immature. So it was back in the late 1870s and early 1800s when people were manifesting this condition where the megaloblastic anemia was the main feature that these people were presenting as a disease or as a condition that needed to be looked after. So again, it's characterized by red blood cells that they're fewer in number, and the ones that remain there, they are bigger in size, but they're not functioning because they are immature, so they cannot properly form a fully functional red blood cell, and for that reason this can cause obviously serious conditions. So megaloblastic anemia was the condition that actually led scientists to discover folate and B12. So how is folate actually assembled? How does the molecule look like? So folate is made up of 3 parts. One is what we call 2-amino-4-hydroxypyrimidine in the left here. And attached to it is a molecule of para-aminobenzoic acid, or PABA. And attached to PABA, we have glutamic acid. Now we have an N here because normally you have anything between 1 and 11 glutamic acids. So it can vary depending on what kind of food you're eating. You may have as little as 1 and as many as 11 glutamic acids attached to the PABA. So this is what makes the actual folate molecule. Now once it gets inside of the cell, there is an enzyme called dihydrofolate reductase that converts folate into tetrahydrofolate. And what it does is actually it adds 4 hydrogen atoms to the molecule. As you can see depicted here in these 4 red squares that we have here, they are depicting, or they are demonstrating, the 4 hydrogen atoms that were added by dihydrofolate and forms tetrahydrofolate. Again, and the remainder of the molecule is the same as it was that I described for folate. And this tetrahydrofolate is the actual functional form of the vitamin. So most of the folate, 90%, found naturally in foods, contains, as I said, multiple glutamates, usually 3 to 11. And they require digestion in order for the vitamin to be absorbed, because if you have all this glutamates attached to it, it becomes too big, so it's hard to cross membranes. So in order for the molecule or folates to be absorbed, a number of these glutamates have to be cleaved from the molecule. So you have to leave only one. So all but one of these glutamates is removed by enzymes in the brush border of intestinal epithelial cells prior to absorption. So there is, like, I would say, partial digestion, because all you do here is remove the additional. If you have 11 glutamates, you have to take off 9. So anything that you have there, except 1 glutamate, have to be removed, and then the folate can be absorbed. So what are the primary functions of folate? It's required as an enzyme cofactor for amino acid metabolism, as well as for synthesis of DNA. And it's also important for homocysteine metabolism. You're going to see later on that in order for you to be able to do interconversions of amino acids inside of the cells, one of the steps produces homocysteine. And in order for you to progress on with the interconversion, you need to have folate and B12 to actually allow proceeding of this amino acid metabolism. So it's important in that aspect. So there is evidence also that food fortification with folic acid significantly reduces the rate of neural tube defects. And this is a very important thing because it has practical implications. There is a Canadian study that reported a decrease of 53% in the incidence of spina bifida after the fortification of a variety of cereal products with folic acid. So the Canadian government now demands, or it's a law, that foods that are processed foods that are commercialized, they have to contain, they have to be supplemented with folic acid. And the reason for this is because this guarantees that people are actually acquiring enough folate, especially women when they get pregnant, because this prevents the occurrence of this condition called spina bifida. And spina bifida is actually a problem because the spine, especially close to the lower back area, if the neural tube does not close properly, it stays open, it remains open after the baby is born. And this is what is called spina bifida, because there is an opening of the spine close to the lower back area. And this can be a very serious complication problem that needs to be dealt with after the baby is born. So in order to prevent this, or any problems with neural tube defects, vitamin or folate is recommended to be, or is actually used as a supplement in foods to reduce the incidence of this condition, especially again in women who are intending to get pregnant, or if they are already pregnant. So the recommended intake, the RDA for men and women, is approximately 400 micrograms per day, and the upper limit is 1,000 micrograms per day, so 2.5 times more than what is recommended. So women that are capable of becoming pregnant should, particularly during the periconceptional period, take 400 micrograms per day of synthetic folic acid. In other words, besides fulfilling the requirement of 400 micrograms per day, which is the RDA, pregnant women or women who intend to be pregnant, they should take another 400 in a synthetic form, which is obviously the supplement. And the reason for this synthetic form to be, the reason why the synthetic form seems to be important and is recommended is because the bioavailability of the synthetic form is 1.7-fold higher than the natural one found in foods. So makes sense for you if you want to guarantee that one particular type of vitamin is present, in this case folate. It makes sense to recommend a synthetic form that is more bioavailable be used in these conditions. So now if we look at foods, what are the foods that contain or the best sources of vitamin of folic acid? Milk is approximately 5 to 12 micrograms in 100 grams. Beef, 5 to 19. Liver, look at liver, 140 to 1,070 micrograms per 100 grams. So you can get pretty much the entire amount of vitamin of folate that you require just by eating liver. I know that liver is usually not a very appetizing food, but especially for those people who don't eat animal foods at all. If you're vegan, for instance, obviously you're not gonna look into this. But for most people who are open to eating this animal products, I mean, liver is a good choice here. But also chicken. Look at chicken liver. Obviously, people, again, liver is not the most appetizing or favorite food that people eat, but that's definitely an excellent source of vitamin of folate. Eggs, 70 micrograms in 100 grams. An egg is approximately 60 to 70 grams, so you have to eat approximately 2 eggs. You get, there's 100 grams. Corn, approximately 35 micrograms. Whole wheat, 30 to 55. Wheat bran, 80. Also mushrooms, asparagus, broccoli, soybeans, spinach, banana. So there is a variety of foods that provide this. So folic acid or folate is not very difficult to acquire if you have a variety of foods in your diet. So what are the symptoms of deficiency? Normally, it's not common, but normally is associated with alcoholism, malabsorptive conditions, and the use of certain medication that can lead to folate deficiency. So you have to be in one of the most common cases of deficiency are associated with one of these situations here. So if that occurs, then as we mentioned before, megaloblastic macrocytic anemia, you cannot form a proper fully functional red blood cell, and it becomes bigger, but it's dysfunctional. So it's megaloblastic macrocytic anemia. Fatigue and weakness, obviously, if you cannot transport oxygen, fatigue and weakness will ensue. Headaches, it also affects brain function, so you can get headaches, irritability, and difficulty concentration. Shortness of breath, because it makes you accelerate your breathing or breathe harder to try to get more oxygen because you're not transporting enough in your blood. And also your heart works harder, so there's heart palpitations associated with that. Another condition, polyneuropathy, which is you have nerve damage in several parts in your body. So there are multiple regions in your body where you have damage in your nerves, so it's called polyneuropathy. And in pregnant women, as we mentioned before, if you're deficient, or women that are deficient in folate, they can have defects in a developing fetus, and usually neural tube defects and spontaneous abortion. So it also leads to elevated homocysteine levels, because remember, metabolism of interconversion of certain amino acids is affected in the absence of folate. Toxicity, you have to take 15 times more than the upper limit, which is 1,000, so it's 15,000 micrograms that you would have to take. So it's a lot, and usually if you take a lot in terms of a supplement, because with foods you usually don't get to that. So it is associated with insomnia, general feeling of being sick, what's called malaise, irritability, and also gastrointestinal distress. So high intake of folate can also mask the symptoms of vitamin B12 deficiency, because these are two interrelated vitamins and one can mask the deficiency of the other. And the implication of this is that vitamin B12 is, if you're deficient for a relatively long period of time, it can cause some severe nerve damage. So what happens is, if you mask B12 deficiency, you may not detect early enough nerve damage. Then what happens is that if you don't fix within that window that is fixable, that you can actually resolve the problem, you can have permanent nerve damage. And this is because vitamin folate is masking the deficiency of B12. So there is that complication. So too much folate can actually mask deficiency of B12, which is can be problematic. So let's go into vitamin B12, because this is one that is, as I said, very interrelated with folate. So the name of vitamin B12 is also cobalamin. So it's often referred to as cobalamin instead of B12. So it was the last vitamin actually to be discovered, and originally identified as the anti-pernicious anemia factor in liver. So pernicious anemia, it was a fatal condition, very, very serious. And what the scientists discovered was that if you eat liver, you actually prevent the condition. So there was a factor in the liver that was named, they didn't know exactly what it was, but so they named it anti-pernicious anemia factor. So but then later on it was discovered that it was vitamin B12. So the name, as I said, pernicious anemia, because it was a fatal. The prognostic was not good. And prior to the discovery of vitamin B12, that definitely it was fatal. There was no cure to the condition. So there are 5 different forms of vitamin B12, different isoforms, if you will, of vitamin B12, and this is because there are 5 different groups attached to the cobalt atom that is kind of in the core of the molecule. And these 5 ones are cyanocobalamin, hydroxycobalamin, aquo or hydrocobalamine, 5'-deoxyadenosylcobalamin, and methylcobalamin. So let's look at the molecule, because it will make it a lot easier for us to understand what we are talking about these 5 different forms of the vitamin. So here again, this is on the left side, this is the structure of the molecule. As you can see, it's a very complex structure. So there is one head of the structure, if you will, like a core portion of the molecule, that is what we call corrine nucleus, which is this structure here, in which you have a cobalt atom right in the center. So you can see here this X in red depicts, or it's to demonstrate that there are 5 different molecules or radicals, if you will, that can be attached to cobalt. And that's what gives the 5 different isoforms of the vitamin. So let's say that you have attached to cobalt, you have cyanide, and then it makes cyanocobalamin. If you have a hydroxyl group, it makes it hydroxycobalamin. If you have water attached to the cobalt, it becomes aquo or hydrocobalamin. If it's 5'-deoxyadenosyl, makes 5'-deoxyadenosylcobalamin. And lastly, if you have a methyl group, or CH3, bound to cobalt, you make it methylcobalamin. Only the 5-deoxyadenosylcobalamin and methylcobalamin are actually active coenzymes in humans. So when you get the other isoforms or the other types, they have to be modified into this 2 to be really functional and active. Usually as a supplement you get cyanocobalamin, but nowadays you can actually buy the methylcobalamin form. So you don't need, it comes ready to work in your system. Once it's absorbed, it's ready to go. It doesn't need to be converted to the active forms. So you can buy this, you can look up on if you're going to buy B12 supplements, you can see what kind of isoform you're buying here. Usually nowadays most of it is in the methylcobalamin form, but you can also find as cyanocobalamin as a commercial version of this vitamin. So in order for the vitamin to be absorbed, it has to be first released from the proteins attached to it. So what do I mean by this? This vitamin is really inside of the cells, works as a coenzyme, but it's associated with proteins inside of the cell. So when you eat a piece of meat, for instance, and you break apart the cell, you need to separate the vitamin from the proteins that are attached to it. So you have to separate it. However, vitamin has to be protected from acid degradation in the stomach and bacterial usage by binding to protein R. Remember, the protein, if you look again, going back here, so the structure of the molecule is pretty complex. You cannot change it. You cannot affect the structure. You have to keep it. You separate from the proteins, but you don't change anything on the molecule. It has to stay as it is to be fully active and to be biologically active in your body. So vitamin B12, in order for it to be protected and be absorbed in its intact form, it has to be protected because acidity of the stomach could destroy it, and also bacteria living in the stomach could also destroy it. So there is a protein called protein R, which is produced by the stomach. It's a glycoprotein that is also present in saliva. So when you eat it, if there is vitamin B12 available, you can bind to protein R, and protein R will work as a chaperone that will actually protect the vitamin all the way down to the intestine, to the small intestine. So vitamin B12 is freed in the alkaline environment of the small intestine. So once it leaves the stomach, enters the duodenum, protein R bound to vitamin B12 is separated. Is cleaved off because the alkaline environment of the duodenum, and also there are some pancreatic proteases that actually separate protein R from B12. So immediately at that point, intrinsic factor, which also comes from the stomach, that is traveling along with the chyme, as soon as protein R detaches from vitamin B12, intrinsic factor binds and protects it. Now intrinsic factor becomes the chaperone or the protector of vitamin B12, so you can travel, you can escape the action of enzymes in the duodenum, and can travel all the way down to the ileum where it's absorbed, as we are going to see it next. So humans that don't have intrinsic factor, because you can be born with a genetic defect that you don't produce intrinsic factor. So if that's the case, then vitamin B12 is not protected. And if that's the case, you don't absorb it. So you end up eliminating most of it in feces. Normally, in normal people who have intrinsic factor, anything between 30 to 60%, depending on how much vitamin B12 you're taking in, will come out in your feces, will be excreted. But if you don't have intrinsic factor, then pretty much everything goes out because you lose the ability to protect, you don't protect B12, and you also miss the opportunity to uptake B12 because B12 also forms a complex. The complex formed with intrinsic factor is what is uptaken by the enterocytes in the ileum. And this, if you lose intrinsic factor, you cannot absorb B12 anymore. This diagram actually explains well or puts together this entire story that I'm saying here. So imagine B12 is entering the stomach. So protein R that is produced in the stomach is present. So as soon, or it comes from the saliva. So as soon as B12 enters the stomach, there is this complex that is formed, B12R, and then it protects the vitamin, and also the stomach produces intrinsic factor. So this all of them are now traveling with chyme. So as chyme travels and moves towards the small intestine, as it enters the duodenum, the alkaline environment and the proteases that are present there, it will separate B12 from protein R. So now B12 cannot stay free because if it stays free, it will be destroyed. So what happens is intrinsic factor quickly binds to it. Now there is a new complex formed, which is B12 intrinsic factor. So it protects again against the action of enzymes here. So B12 travels all the way down, it gets to the ileum. So what I have here is this rectangle. So let's take this rectangle and amplify on the side here. So this is what we have. See, this is the complex B12 intrinsic factor. So there is on the ileum, the enterocyte there has a receptor. So the receptor recognizes the intrinsic factor, binds to it, and internalizes the whole complex. Now B12 intrinsic factor inside of the ileum, they become separated. Intrinsic factor now detaches from B12. B12 is free. B12 now is bound to another protein called transcobalamin, because it's a transporter for transcobalamin in blood. So now it gains access into the circulation and can travel to organs and tissues and can be absorbed and used by cells. Now imagine, as I said before, if you don't have intrinsic factor, you cannot absorb B12 because it's the transporter, or because the receptor recognizes intrinsic factor. So if you don't have it, you cannot take in vitamin B12. So it depends. The absorption of B12 depends on intrinsic factor. Not only because intrinsic factor is not only important to protect the molecule from being degraded, but also to allow it to be absorbed via a transporter mediated process. So vitamin B12, unlike other water-soluble vitamins, can be stored in the body, actually for years. And signs of deficiency can take a long time to be noted or to manifest, usually 3 to 5 years. Because again, that big molecule, once it gets inside of the cell, is trapped in there. And unless, if the cell, or the only way you're going to destroy or lose that vitamin is if you actually, so if the cell dies, or if there is a disassemble. If the cell is disassembled for some reason, if the cell dies, and then vitamin B12 becomes available. But even with that, you can recycle some of it. So most of the vitamin, or the largest amount of vitamins, is stored in the liver. And if you look in your body, the place where you have the highest amount of B12 is in the liver. More than half of the total, approximately 50% actually, is in the liver. So what makes obviously what makes it obvious that the liver is also a good source of vitamin B12. When you eat liver, you're getting good amounts of vitamin B12. But you also get in your muscle, you have in your bones, in your heart, in your kidneys, brain, and spleen. They all contain relatively small amounts of vitamin B12. So it's spread in your body. You have a major organ, which is the liver, that stores a big amount. But all cells, to some extent, have some vitamin B12 because it's important in many ways, as you see next. So what are the physiological roles of vitamin B12? So it's a coenzyme in the conversion of homocysteine into methionine. So the process of converting amino acid into conversion, one step in between is the homocysteine to methionine conversion. And if you don't have B12, you cannot form methionine. So homocysteine accumulates in your body. And if you have high levels of homocysteine, and one possible reason for this is because you're deficient of vitamin B12. It's important in the process of synthesis and degradation of amino acids. So leucine, for instance, and also propionate. These are things that can, for you to be able to metabolize this, you need vitamin B12. And also without vitamin B12, active folate coenzymes cannot be formed. And this impairs DNA synthesis as well as cell differentiations and maturation. So there is a complex set of conditions that can arise if you don't have enough vitamin B12. Also, in the absence of B12, there is a delay or failure of normal cell division, and also arrested DNA synthesis, which leads to the formation of enlarged cells. That's why it's called megaloblastic anemia. Now imagine here, red blood cells, they usually have a lifespan of 120 days. Once they reach that lifespan, they are destroyed, new ones have to be made. So in your bone marrow, you're making red blood cells constantly. So you need to have cell division, you need to have DNA synthesis, and cell replication. So if you don't have vitamin B12 and you cannot form, or you don't have folate in B12 or B12 in this case, you cannot really replicate DNA, you cannot form new red blood cells. So that's why you have that condition called megaloblastic anemia, because you have fewer red blood cells, and the ones that you have are big and dysfunctional, because you cannot really efficiently produce or make a fully functional red blood cell. Besides that, you also have neurological abnormalities. And these are progressive. They develop in a progressive manner because there is demyelination of nerves. So you lose myelin for nerves. And if you lose that nerve can be damaged permanently. So if you catch it early on and you replace and you provide vitamin B12, you fix the deficiency, you can actually reverse the condition, and you can put myelin back on the neurons. You can make fully functional neurons. But if you miss that window and that there is permanent damage of nerves, then you cannot reverse the condition, and you have really serious neurological abnormalities that will be carried on forever. So B12 can be a very serious also. B12 deficiency can be very, very devastating to multiple functions in your body, so including severe neurological abnormalities. So important, if you're vegan, vegetables, grains, and fruits do not contain vitamin B12. Strict vegetarian diets do not provide appropriate amounts of B12 and may require supplementation to meet the RDA. So if you're vegan, if you don't eat any animal products, make sure that you look after your needs of vitamin B12. So normally what is recommended is a supplementation of B12 to make sure that you get enough. Also, cobalt is part of vitamin B12. But there is no requirement for the dietary intake of this element. So it doesn't really, you don't need to take cobalt. If I take, I'm a vegan, but I take cobalt. Does it suffice? Will it allow me to make B12? No. You can have tons of cobalt in your body, and you're not going to make one single molecule of B12. So B12 is made by, it's present in animal products, it's made in an animal, and then you can take in the molecule as I showed before. And it contains cobalt, but you cannot compensate the lack of B12 by taking more cobalt, because it will do nothing. So vitamin B12 cannot be synthesized from dietary cobalt. In fact, it is the vitamin B12 content of foods in the diet rather than cobalt itself that is important in human nutrition. So make sure that you take enough vitamin B12. If you don't eat animal products, make sure you get a supplement for that. So what's the RDA? Men 2.4, women the same micrograms per day. So that's the requirement of B12. And the upper limit, no, it's not established. There is no upper limit. There is no symptoms of toxicity that have been reported for vitamin B12. So there is no upper limit. So what are the major dietary sources? It's meat and meat products that are the best. So as I say, beef, 1.94364, liver, 0.69 to 1.22, egg yolk, very rich in B12, 9.26 micrograms per 100 grams. So about, one egg is approximately 60 grams, depending on the size of the egg, obviously, but the average weight of an egg is about 60 grams. So it would be like 1.5 or 2 eggs to get 9.26 micrograms, which is way more than what you need. It's 2.4. You're getting almost 4 times more than what you actually need if you eat 1 or 100 grams of egg yolk. Herring, salmon, tuna, oysters, and milk. So they all contain B12. So again, as long as you're getting an animal, you're eating, your diet contains animal products, you're good. You should be good to go. If you're not, you can still get it, provided that you get a supplement. So make sure that you understand that. Deficiency, as we mentioned before, pernicious anemia, tingling and numbness of extremities. This is a neurological problem because of loss of myelination and damage of nerves. Memory loss, obviously related to that, and you become disoriented, and it can also lead to dementia. So these are all complications associated with nerve damage. Symptoms of toxicity, none that we know. So as I said, because there is no upper limit, also related to the fact that there is no symptoms of toxicity reported. And this seems to be because if you take too much vitamin B12, you end up eliminating in the feces. There is only so much you can absorb, because the limiting factor here is the presence of intrinsic factor and how much intrinsic factor you have. So if you surpass the number if you have more molecules of B12 than you have intrinsic factor, then you're going to have some B12 that will go through without being absorbed. So the limiting factor is intrinsic factor. For that reason, it's very difficult to develop toxicity or to take more than what you need, because your body will only produce intrinsic factor proportional to the amount of vitamin that you actually need, and it's required for you to replace what you lose. So no issues with taking more than what you need or taking too much. So with that, we finish vitamins. And next topic we are going to talk is minerals. And I want to just mention here that we are going to discuss only 3 minerals. We are going to discuss calcium, iodine, and iron. In your book, you have a whole list of minerals. But we are going to only focus on 3 of them. And the reason why we do this is because in order for us to be able to cover all the material within the time that we have available, we have to limit how many we can cover here, because we could do an entire course on minerals the same way we could have done an entire course on vitamins. But for minerals, we are going to have to limit only to 3 of them, because these are the 3 most common, and usually they have a very important role. And not that the other ones don't, the others ones do too, but these 3 are crucial because they are very commonly discussed and they are often spoken about. So I want to make sure you understand those. So these are calcium, iodine, and iron. Now, we're going to have a guest lecturer to give us or to teach us about these minerals. And this is going to be Mr. Daniel Daera. He is a PhD candidate in my lab. He does research in my lab, and he is a very good, very knowledgeable about this topic. So he's going to give us the lecture, the next lecture, that we will be covering these 3 minerals. All the other ones in the book, if you want to read them, if you want to understand, know about them, that's fine. It's for your knowledge. It's always good. But for testing purposes, again, you need to make sure you know calcium, iodine, and iron. So with this, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.